Hi, this is Michael Kirsch. You're watching an overview of Section 2, NAWAPA 21 Special Report. This is the Water and Agriculture section. We're going to look at all of the uses of the water collected in the North, how it's going to transform the North American continent, and increase the ability for people to live on this continent for the coming 100 years. But let me just say first that if you're coming to the website for the first time or you're watching this series of videos for the first time, you're watching a series of videos giving an overview of this special report. We're going to be following it up in the next few days, looking at the third section of the report on the principles of national banking and the credit system. And we're asking you to contribute the maximum you can to LaRouchepack.com, because what we're doing right now is we're making this special report the platform for this election. Any qualified candidate, anybody who's going to emerge as a candidate, anybody running for office, these principles in this report are the principles that have to be understood, and the project and the program for jobs, long-term water security, that has to be understood if they're going to be qualified for this election. So let's just get into this section now. Water and agriculture. Here we've constructed a system which is going to bring water from the north, 11% approximately of the runoff water of Alaska, British Columbia, Yukon, and collect roughly 22% of the total runoff into a system of reservoirs and canals. Now, once this water is brought down, once it's brought down from the northern regions, transferred through Idaho, from the Columbia to the Great Basin, we end up getting into the southwestern United States distribution section of the system. So we're going to give you an overview of how this entire thing works right now, how we're going to be greening areas of the desert, how we're going to be creating a whole series of reservoirs, 233 million acre feet, 32 reservoirs throughout the Southwest, and irrigation canals that will be capable of increasing the farmland of the Southwest by 19.3 million acres, which is almost double the currently irrigated amount. Which really means what we're doing is we're going to be bringing, we're going to be tapping into a Pacific Ocean cycle, bringing that cycle inland, extending the time in which this cycle operates, and it's essentially creating a man-made river such that we can double the amount of surface water available. In fact, probably a lot more than double at this point due to the overdrafting of the rivers, which we're going to get into, as a permanent fixture of the Southwest. So as we look back at this last century, and we look back at the 32 million acre feet of available annual runoff from the San Joaquin, the Sacramento, the Colorado River, and the Rio Grande, we can look at the fact that man's use of that and the development of all of the storage reservoirs in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, which we've been living off of now, was a stepping stone to actually now add a more than double fixed constant supply. How long will this allow us and how to exist and increase our productivity in this country and the continent? And how long can we use this as a stepping stone to an even higher system? The central principle of this NAWAPA 21 system is that we're saying that mankind, as in the evolution of the biosphere, is becoming less and less dependent on external factors and more self-defined through discovery of technology and acting on this much bigger cycles. We're looking at transforming the weather of the Southwest, transforming the available water by creating new sources of water. And this is something that in the 1930s and 40s, people decided to do in creating and managing the river basins under the Franklin Roosevelt administration, and something that had been studied in the 1920s and 30s earlier. We looked at regulating and creating storage capabilities in the Colorado River, which before mostly is a wild river. Only people can go down into the river who want to hike down and look at this muddy river. Instead, we create storage reservoirs which attract people from all over to see the beauty of the reservoirs. And this is the case with Lake Shasta, also up in Northern California, the Trinity Division. And this is what these people did to increase the storage availability and irrigation availability many times. And this process was supposed to continue. Now, what's happened is that while from 1950 to 1980, we saw an increase of water use in this country from 201 million acre feet per year to 482 million acre feet per year, 1950 to 1980, more than doubling. That leveled off in 1980 to actually now be only 459 million acre feet a year. What we have for irrigation, similarly, we used 100 million acre feet per year in 1950, increasing that to 168 million acre feet in 1980. Increasing our irrigated land from 25 million acres, more than doubling that to 58 million acres of irrigated land. It's gone nowhere since then. And what we're at now is well understood is an impossible breaking point situation. And recently we've had a national security report come out and say that within the next 10 years, governments around the world, and including our government, they're going to be occupied with this problem more than any other problem. That water security is going to be an issue, the lack of food production, the overdrafting of reservoirs in the southwestern United States and other regions of the planet are going to make this an issue that if not addressed and dealt with is going to lead to warfare, terrorist acts, and all the kind of measures that are going to go along with having a collapse of food and water in the midst of the horrible situation we're already in. And they also make the point, if the U.S. does not lead on solving this problem, we will fall behind as far as world leaders. Now we're presenting a solution to this problem. Pick up where we left off with the John F. Kennedy legacy of a vision for the future, a country on a great errand for the future of its people. And with this system, I'm going to describe now how we can deal with this crisis in the Southwest and continue that development. Now, what we're looking at is a total of 52 million acre feet, roughly, as for a starting analysis, to be brought through the Southwest. And as I said, we currently use from surface water about 42 million acre feet of irrigation, of water for irrigation. And what we're looking at here is that this water is going to be available through a storage reservoir, the Rocky Mountain Trench, and 20 million acre feet will be available for Mexico. So what we want to start with is the Colorado Basin. We have a few major basins we're going to be looking at and how this is going to solve it. The Colorado Basin, the Rio Grande Basin, the California Water Resource Basin, and the Great Basin. Now the Colorado has the upper and lower. The Colorado Basin was one of the first to really be developed, and people know in the 1930s, under the Roosevelt administration, we maximized the use of the Hoover Dam, the biggest dam at that time, 700 feet tall. Later in the 1960s was completed Lake Powell, which is the upper Colorado, the division between the upper and the lower Colorado Basin. These reservoir systems created 61 million acre feet of reservoir storage. The river itself was allocated between upper and lower as 7.5 million acre feet each, even though the actual total flow of the river is 11 million acre feet. Now, in the early years, this didn't matter that it was over-allocated for the north because they didn't use that much. But now it's not. Now we have an over-allocation, we have an overdrafting in the lower Colorado of 1.3 million acre feet a year. We have an actual maximization of use. As of 1995, where we're looking at over 100% use of the total water availability of the region. As defined by the USGS, resource availability is total rainwater plus imports minus exports of water. That total availability that could possibly be used both by groundwater drafting and by surface water use is overmaxed in the southern Colorado Basin, in the lower Colorado River Basin. And right now it's probably a lot worse than 103%, as it was not the 1995 figure. We're looking at pumping as is getting a lot worse, the amount of depth that you have to pump. California and Arizona depend on groundwater for domestic use. 45% for California, 60% for Arizona, respectively. Now, we're looking at in Arizona, which is the chief state of the lower Colorado Basin, farmland is being abandoned due to this problem. In southeast Arizona, the pumping depth is getting higher and higher and higher. 200 feet you have to pump down now to get the water up for agriculture. It's becoming more and more expensive. Essentially, over the last 50 years, we've had this lower and lower depth of pumping. Meanwhile, we have subsidence, 18 feet, 15 feet, land subsidence throughout southeastern Arizona. The total water availability of this lower Colorado region, as I said, the total rainwater, etc., 6.1 million acre feet. What NAWAPA 21 would do is bring 18 million acre feet a year to this region. And we'll look at how that water, we're here distributing it by basin. We can also distribute it by state and look at state figures for irrigation. But if you take a look at this, and what you can see in the report, we cite a mapping that we did using software of all of the reservoirs. And we put this here for you now to take a look at all these reservoirs throughout the lower Colorado. As I said, 61 million acre feet was the storage created in the lower Colorado region up by the 1970s. We're talking about adding 174 million acre feet of storage capacity with the NAWAPA 21 system, almost tripling. In addition, as I say, we're bringing 18 million acre feet a year for irrigation, almost tripling the irrigated available water for irrigation. In the lower Colorado, we would add 2.11 million acres of farmland, which would be an increase from the current amount of farmland under irrigation of 223%. So this is a substantial change, and most of the reservoirs in the Southwest are in the lower Colorado region, and we'll see that. The California water system was begun to be developed in the 1950s. 1957, the California Water Plan. The State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, they created a total of 26 million acre feet of reservoir storage. What we have there is two major rivers. Sacramento River of 17 million acre feet of year of runoff, and the San Joaquin, 3.4 million acre feet a year of runoff. In California, situation the same throughout the Southwest. Depletion, trade-offs of water for this, water for that. We have a salination problem, land subsidence, farm loss, water for farms, originally for farms, now going to the cities. Area around San Diego, water rights issues, agriculture land going down, water for San Diego and other regions going up. 11 out of the 50 aquifers of the Southwest were overdrafted by the 1990s. That's probably a lot worse now. Some areas, 29 feet of land subsidence, such as Southwest Mendota. Other places, 12 feet, 5 feet. And what we have is, as I said, irrigation land collapsing. People looking at how we're going to end up having to recycle our urine for drinking water throughout California. What we have is at stake here is the most amount of irrigated land throughout the Southwest. California, as we know, the Imperial Valley system, people of the United States depend on California. This is not a question of California. This is a question of the United States food security. 50% of our food is produced throughout the Southwest. A portion of that, a large portion of that, as of 2005, California produced 9.1 million of those acres. 2008, that figure is 7.5 million acres. I don't know whether that decrease is actually a trend or was it just that year. But the point is, that's how many acres are at stake here if we don't solve this problem. Without technology, without increase, without this kind of project, it's sort of, we're looking at just a trend of how long can we survive, as though we give up the discovered technologies, we set them over here. How long can we survive in the woods? It's almost like the Survivor show or something. Who can last the longest, living in the woods, eating bugs and so forth. Let's change that situation. What we would do with NAWAPA 21, get back on the path of development and utilizing our technologies and an ability to create new water, and we would increase in California, we would bring in about 12 million acre feet a year in the California Water Resource Basin with the current design of NAWAPA 21, and we'll get into an extension we can put in a little bit later, would be about 10 million acre feet. That would be a 12% increase of the total renewable supply per year. Increase irrigated land by 3.3 million acres. And if you compare it with the river flow, the San Joaquin and the Sacramento, which is about 20 million acre-feet a year, that would be about a 50% increase. So we'll get back in. We're looking at an additional plan via the Columbia to Chutes River for water for the north. But now let's look at the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande is probably the most in crisis in the Southwest. Our own calculations of the Rio Grande showed that it was at 112% stress. That's using 112% of the total available rainwater per year. The flow of the Rio Grande is 0.7 million acre-feet a year, which is a lot less than these other rivers mentioned. There is a total of 20 million acre-feet of storage developed over the course of up to probably about the 1970s. Right now in New Mexico, 90% of the population depends on aquifers for their domestic water use. That's a bad situation. In Albuquerque, the biggest city in New Mexico, that's the same figure. You have land subsidence around the area. In Texas, which is also in the Rio Grande River Basin in West Texas, well, Texas as a whole has 45% of its drinking water, domestic water use, dependent on groundwater. That's a lot worse down in the region near the Rio Grande for the state of Texas. So again, it's very bad. We're looking at Albuquerque. The city of Albuquerque depends on alluvial aquifer, which is a very precarious situation for the biggest city in New Mexico, depending on a source of water, which is getting continually more and more difficult and unsustainable to use. 6.1 million acre-feet a year is the USGS figure for the water availability for the region. And as I said, that's way overstressed, 113% at minimum. What we're going to do with this plan is to bring in 16 million acre-feet a year, which is an increase more than double for this whole Rio Grande River Basin. We're going to be bringing that in through this system you can see in our software mapping, and we're going to be creating one serious major reservoir in this system of about 35 million acre-feet a year, the Pecos River Reservoir, which will distribute water for the Pecos River. That reservoir is about the size of Lake Mead. Right now, there's 20 million acre-feet of storage in the Rio Grande Basin. So this is about 150% increase or so. So in the lower Colorado, we're talking about tripling the storage capacity here, 150% storage capacity as a permanent addition. So we're looking at the next 100 years under this context and solving these problems in the Southwest. The current policy is to move people out of the Southwest, given the studies that have been done for somehow creating a sustainable groundwater drafting of only a certain amount of rainwater. If we're going to increase the productivity of our economy, bring back industries in this country, we're going to be using more water. If we're going to be increasing our irrigation, we're going to be using more water. So the current strategy, which is to continually try to just use the same or less and less and less amount of water, really is a policy of depopulation and moving people out of the Southwest. There's no other way to interpret it. So the last major water resources region that the NAWAPA 21 project is going to transform in the Southwest is the Great Basin. Now this basin is different than the other basins that we've been talking about. There's no major river basin here. This is sort of a closed, and if you look at the topography of the region, it's a closed system. There's no major flow. There's no major streams that are developed. There's famous lakes, salty lakes, Mono Lake, the Great Salt Lake, Pyramid Lake, and agriculture is limited in the region for obvious reasons. But even being that so, the agriculture that was in motion in the 1990s has, since the 1990s, has collapsed by almost 50% in Nevada. This is because we set up various markets for water rights, and so we transferred 50% of the farmland into other uses. 1.3 million acres were in action in 1972. That changed to 0.685 million acres in 2008. Similarly, in Utah, it went down from 1.4 to 1.1 million acres. Now, this whole Great Basin area has 11.2 million acre feet a year as its renewable supply, as I mentioned, the rainwater imports minus exports. What we do is bring about 6 million acre feet a year, and that would be a 53% increase, and 4 of that would be in Nevada through a few major reservoirs and irrigation systems, and what we were looking at is about 1.37 million acre increase in Nevada. That's about a 238% increase in irrigated land. In Utah, we're looking at about 500,000 acre of farmland, 45% increase still. There's a few major reservoirs here that you can see. Lake Nevada, as the water is distributed out of the Sawtooth Lift system and beginning in the distribution system, it enters into the biggest line canal of the Southwest system. This canal will be winding through the Great Basin and then distributing itself into 2 different ways in Utah. Before it gets into this diversion point, distributing in 2 ways, there's going to be a big major reservoir, Lake Nevada, and that's going to be about 7.5 million acre feet of storage. Also, we're going to be creating a major reservoir system, we could call it Lake Vegas, and that's going to be roughly also 7.5 million acre feet. So we're adding, with these 2 major reservoirs, as well as one in Utah, Sevier Bridge, in the Sevier Bridge area reservoir there, this would be about 14.47 or so million acre feet of storage reservoir added to the region. So that's going to be a major transformation of this whole basin. If we take the system and we break it up by states, what we've done, we see in this section 2 of the report, we've recalculated based on the needed water for an acre of crops, which varies state to state and has an average. But by doing that analysis, we can see that this 52 million acre feet a year, based on the division of the water for 4 million acre feet for Nevada, 2 in Utah, 12 for Arizona, California, and Texas, and 8 to New Mexico, and 2 million acre feet a year for Colorado, we're looking at, if we divide the water by industrial, domestic, and agriculture, as it's currently divided as a ratio, which may not be the case, but if we do that, we're talking about 9.76 million acres of new farmland opened up or brought back, farmland that's been lost due to the reasons mentioned. If we put all of the water for irrigation, that's 19.16 million new acres. Currently, there's 21.88 million acres in the Southwest. So we're talking about doubling the irrigated land. I don't know what that means as far as food, but for purposes of argument, doubling the food production of the Southwest of the United States. What we're also talking about here is these 32 reservoirs, as well as the irrigated land, will be enough to change the climate of the region. And experience has shown in various places where, especially in arid regions, studies have been done that in arid regions, large reservoirs can change the vapor flux enough to change trends in precipitation or influence existing changes in trends in precipitation. The uses of the increase in evaporated water going on affecting the plants in the region, and also an aggressive use of land cover in the region, can change the climate enough to change the precipitation trends. Now, what kind of land cover is done will be something that we can coordinate with the NAWAPA 21 control system, the authority that's going to be working with government groupings and selling the water, distributing the water where it is, and the sale of power. Now, this could be done in such a way that we decide to sell water with incentives or in agreements with various programs to direct certain kinds of land cover, or make it beneficial to engage in a program of biospheric engineering for the use of that water. So which types of plants in the region will have a particular relation with the hydrological cycle, the geology in the region, the topographic relation of weather impact with mountainous regions, such that we can direct and begin to learn how to control the weather and actually increase precipitation if so desired. What we already know is that on average, studies have been done that of rainfall, roughly 60% of that or so we look at as becomes is in one category, 40% in another, runoff versus water that's absorbed into the soil or re-evaporated. And that water that's re-evaporated is on average, if you look at statistically around the world, 2.7 times before it makes it back to the ocean, whereas the other immediately runs off. This water that we're bringing in is going to be brought into the portion that is continually re-evaporating. So in addition to this, the water here for irrigation, we're also talking about the fact that the water that's used for irrigation of the plants will be itself evaporating multiple times. So we're already talking about having that kind of impact in the region. If we want to change that, increase that, we can play around with this. We can also, there's studies for reservoir retention. If we don't want to let that evaporate as much in the early stages of the program, we can design that in. We can, new technologies, it'll be a whole program. Also stocking the reservoirs with fish. What kind of organisms, what kind of small algae and plants to maximize aquatic protein production for the continent. This is all something that we can look at if we're deciding now to direct our fate rather than being subject to the whims of nature and these erratic cycles in the weather. Instead, we're going to be building in a long-term stability of the whole entire region. And we're going to be acting on a much bigger ocean water cycle. Now, let me just say that before we conclude, the other uses of the water of this whole system. Mexico, we're talking about bringing 20 million acre-feet a year through Arizona, also through California, Texas. Some of the major distributors for the NAWAPA 21 system will all have extension canals down into Mexico. This would triple the food production of Mexico. Right now, Mexico has 7.7 million acre-feet a year available. So 20 million acre-feet is a near tripling. This would be an 111% increase in irrigated land. Right now, there's 4.82 million acres under irrigation in Mexico for farmland. If we brought this water 20 million acres, all of it for irrigated land, that would increase it by 5.3 million acres. So right now, Mexico has the same problem, but even worse in a lot of regions where the aquifers that are pumped are aquifers that are pumped well over the ability for that aquifer to recharge. So whereas some regions, it's over 100% of the aquifer recharge a year. So rather than using the same amount that's recharged with rainwater, it's over 100% of that in many areas. Same problem. We have also a problem. Same subsidence, and worse, we have all of these maquiladoras on the border of Mexico, cheap labor manufacturing it with Mexican water and selling it back to the United States. The sale of vegetables and all of these things into the United States is a sale of virtual water into the United States. We are in the United States relying on less and less water, and the only reason we're able to still exist with this much water is through the import of this food through cheap labor and importing it from Mexico. So Mexico is exporting water to the United States. Now, let's take a look at these various other uses of the water of the system. And first, we'll stay in the southwestern United States. We can, by increasing the total water of the NAWAPA system from 22% to 23%, increase the collection by 15 million acre-feet. That water could be added to the Columbia River and then be pumped into the Deschutes River above the Dalles Dam on the Columbia system of dams. That water could go through the Deschutes River east and west in Oregon, in the dry regions of Oregon, and also be brought down via Silver Lake, a canal into the Lake Shasta system, which is the northern supply for the California water projects. And this supply serves the Sacramento Valley, which is currently under great need of water. So this water could be available there through this Trinity division of dams. Also coming through Nevada on the border, we would end up going by or through Mono Lake, and this would then finally supply the Owens Valley system of water supply for Southern California and irrigation in the San Joaquin Valley. And this is be a total of about 15 million acre feet for this whole system, which could be increased under various negotiations and agreements with British Columbia and Canada. This would also finally link up after the Owens Valley and refilling Owens Lake with the Panamint Reservoir of NAWAPA 21 in California. And what you begin to get a picture here when you look at it is that we can have water going both ways if necessary for flood control, drought control. So it's one regulated, interconnected system. And these different projects can link up and therefore have much more control for the purposes of this system as a flood and drought control water management system when it's necessary in one place. So we move it when it's necessary in one place and move it somewhere else when it's not. So it's more of a regulation rather than simply just constant delivery regardless of the condition of the system. And that can be negotiated. The additional extension is one for the Great Plains. The Missouri River floodwater could be pumped up the Niobrara River up to 3,000 feet, 200 miles of this river, and then a long canal going eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, western Oklahoma, and West Texas, finally linking in to the Pecos River system of NAWAPA 21. This canal could be extended out to link up with the Colorado Reservoir of NAWAPA 21, again creating this interconnected system, water coming from both ways and supplying in years from one source when from the other source you have a drought. Long-term regulation. That canal of about 900 miles would irrigate about 6 million acres. Now, in Canada, they share a region in Alberta and Saskatchewan of quasi-desert region. The Great American Desert, if you look at it with the NASA animation, is this whole swath of this continent due to the interaction of the Pacific Ocean weather cycle with the mountain regions. It's an accidental feature of where the deserts are and where they're not. Some of these areas, however, are great for irrigated farmland, and for other reasons we should have people there, and we can control this. We can control this flow of water, and it would be much more beneficial put to these uses than as it's currently just turning into salt water every year. Taking a portion of this, we've described how we can use it in the Southwest. By creating a canal system throughout southern Canada, we'll also be able to bring 4.4 million acre feet a year to Alberta, 7.6 million acre feet a year to Saskatchewan, and 7.6 million acre feet a year to Manitoba. Now this water can be used for irrigation to potentially open up about 9 million acres of farmland. It could also be used for energy development in the area. There's need for water to be used for the Athabasca tar sand and other interests that might want to use the water, the Bakken Formation, things like that. But the other main benefit of this is to also bring water to stabilize the Great Lakes if necessary, which is a key interest for the U.S. and Canada. One of the most fascinating features of this continental water system, when operating on a continent-wide basis, we begin to be able to solve problems or create potentialities that you could never if you're simply looking at basin by basin, such as a barge canal from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from Vancouver, and creating a lock system that would go from Vancouver into British Columbia, and then around the Peace River region, come down through hugging essentially the coasts of Canada through Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, and finally into Lake Superior. And that canal system would create a situation where Canada would be an inflection point for world trade in places where you didn't want to use the Panama Canal. And this may have other interactions with the current situation that's going on with Arctic shipping. But in itself, this would make Canada and the resources of Canada a much cheaper a resource for access and shipping. Other canals would be added. Massive resource availability, massive ores, lumber, things that would now make it cheap to transport and produce on site rather than shipping into the United States or by highway and other things for trade. 32 gigawatts of power are going to be generated for sale in British Columbia. With that cheap water, we're looking at new industries. With that cheap power, we're looking at new industries opening up that could then access and utilize that canal system for cheap barge transport. Other uses of the water. Lake Powell in the 1960s showed by itself that 1,800 miles of shoreline was opened up. That amount of shoreline was more than all of the recreational shoreline from Washington State down to Texas, if you can believe it. We may find that by creating these 32 reservoirs in the Southwest, by creating the reservoirs in British Columbia and Alaska and the other portions of the system, it would be reason enough alone just for parks and recreation. We would create many new parks, and the fishing would boom, the sportsman fishing, the fisheries, but recreation itself and all of these, we would probably multiply at least 10 times the recreational shoreline made available. For all of this farmland that we're talking about opening up and all the uses of water, we have to realize that we're also in a context of a certain financial system right now. The time span of opening up this water over the next 10 years could give us ample time to make the kind of changes such that when the water would be available, it would be available in a new context. We have a problem with food reserves. The current speculative system has made it illegal, essentially, for farmers and impossible and non-profitable to keep food reserves in the United States. So if we had some kind of major national catastrophe, the big volcano up at Yellowstone, that was to destroy a lot of our farming for the year, we don't have food reserves beyond a number of weeks. And according to our national farming institutes that we've discussed with, this is the situation, such that even a reoccurrence of another 2 years of the kind of flooding of the Mississippi, the long spring of 2011 in the Northwest, the tornadoes of this last season and the season before destroying our crops, these kinds of things are making it such that we are looking at a mass starvation threat in the United States. And the policy, the financial policy, is making the infrastructure policy, the infrastructure situation, an order of magnitude worse. So we have to change the policy of food reserves, regulate the market speculation, get over our fantasy about regulation and how the market is going to lead to a new idea, or the market's going to generate the best direction of all for economic growth. So we're going to have to bring back parity pricing, food reserves. This is going to be initiated through a reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act. This is going to involve a reorganization of the whole banking system, reassessment of what it means to use the Constitution, and in this special report, you're going to find in Section 3 a full historical sweep and a proposal now to initiate this step-by-step reconfiguration of the U.S. financial system, a restoration of the credit system, and a reinstatement of the powers of Congress to fund a national banking system. We've always done it, and the free market hacks out there who have been saying that the U.S. is founded on such and such are shown in this review of this Section 3 as historically illiterate. So stay tuned. We're going to be going through that in the coming days.